And good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 113 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, we're going to find out that it pays to be suspicious.
That's right, folks. Sam's skeptical nature saves the day. We'll head on over to the common room for our chapter discussion in just a bit, but first, I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, who is too large and heavy for a hobbit, Alan Sisto.
Well, yeah, I guess that's for sure, but just to be clear, I own neither yellow boots nor a blue coat.
And after 112 episodes, I can confirm that you don't speak in rhythmic prose either. But before we continue these distinctions, it's time for another installment of This Week in Tolkien History. Now, this episode is going to be releasing on February 17th, 2019. That makes it the 125th birthday of J.R.R. Tolkien's brother, Hilary Arthur Ruel Tolkien.
Oh, yes.
Now, we haven't talked about Tolkien's brother Hilary before on the show that much, if at all. And that's really a shame because,
Yeah.
we've talked about...
That's a miss, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked about the influence of Tolkien's wife, his mother, his children, even his guardian, Father Francis Morgan, but not his brother Hilary.
Yeah.
And I know, Alan, you and I were kind of talking about this a little bit, and we briefly speculated that it might be because we're both only children.
That's true, yeah.
Even though we both have multiple kids, we probably don't stop often enough to think about just how much of an impact having a sibling has on you growing up.
That's true.
To which I'm sure everybody out there in our audience who does have a sibling,
Which is just about everybody, yeah.
Yeah, statistics say is about 80% of you. It's probably just shaking your head and just laughing at our stupidity, I'm sure.
Or our naivete, I prefer to think, but okay.
Yeah. That is better than stupidity. I don't like saying stupidity.
No, I don't either, especially when you're talking about me.
Yeah.
I got words about that.
Yeah.
But you're right. Hilary and Ronald did have a major impact on each other's lives. As we would expect, they were very close in age. Hilary was just barely 2 years younger than Ronald, 25 months. Now, Humphrey Carpenter includes a lot of fun details in the early chapters of his biography. I'm going to read a passage that talks about the summer of 1896 when the Tolkien brothers were living in Sarehole with their mother shortly after the death of their father. Hilary Tolkien was only 2.5, but soon he was accompanying his elder brother on expeditions across the meadow to the mill, where they would stare through the fence at the water wheel turning in its dark cavern, or run round to the yard where the sacks were swung down onto a waiting cart. Sometimes they would venture through the gate and gaze into an open doorway where they could see the great leather belts and pulleys and shafts and the men at work. There were 2 millers, father and son. The old man had a black beard, but it was the son who frightened the boys with his white dusty clothes and sharp-eyed face. Ronald named him the White Ogre. When he yelled at them to clear off, they would scamper away from the yard and run round to a place behind the mill where there was a silent pool with swans swimming on it. There also was a farmer nearby who was given the nickname the Black Ogre by the Tolkien boys. He once chased young Ronald away for, you guessed it, picking mushrooms.
That's so cool. Now, Hilary Tolkien actually assisted Humphrey Carpenter with his biography of J.R.R., and he recollected to Carpenter in the 1970s. We spent lovely summers just picking flowers and trespassing. The Black Ogre used to take people's shoes and stockings from the bank where they'd left them to paddle and run away with them, make them go and ask for them. And then he'd thrash them.
Well, that is much worse than Farmer Maggot beating Frodo, I will say.
I know, right? It kind of makes Farmer Maggot seem a little tame now.
Yeah.
The White Ogre wasn't quite so bad, Hilary said. But in order to get to the place where we used to blackberry, called the Dell, we had to go through the White One's land. And he didn't like us very much because the path was narrow through his field, and we traipsed off after corn cockles and other pretty things. My mother got us lunch to have in this lovely place, but when she arrived, she made a deep voice, and we both ran. As you can tell, these little childhood games that Ronald and Hilary used to play together already show just this vivid imagination from the boys and this tendency to kind of find the fantasy and the adventure in everything. And there really are some obvious seeds here of ideas that would make their way into Lord of the Rings eventually.
Absolutely.
As it turns out, Hilary actually wrote down a number of his childhood reminiscences about his brother in a notebook much later in his life. Now, Hilary passed away in 1976, but his tales were published in 2009 in a collection titled Black and White Ogre Country, The Lost Tales of Hilary Tolkien. You're going to have to shop secondhand if you're interested in this book, but one of your co-hosts has managed to track down a copy.
And it's not me.
It's not you. It is me. It's pretty slim, but it does have some great illustrations by a professional illustrator and some sketches by Hilary himself of the black and white ogres, lots of family photographs, and a brief biography of Hilary. So it's a pretty cool little book.
Yeah, but if you can't track it down, you can read a review of it written by John Garth on his blog in a post called The Tolkien Brothers in Bumble Dell, which was published 5 years ago on Hilary's 120th birthday. Now, we'll put a link up to that in our show notes. Garth points out in that review that Tolkien made a comment in a 1956 letter to H. Cotton Minchin, part of which was published as number 187, but not the part I'm about to quote, that most of the Shire was derived from childhood. Certainly that's an assertion borne out by Hilary's memories as told in his collection.
That's true. Well, as they got older, Hilary did end up going to King Edward's school, same as his brother. It seems as though the academic life wasn't really for him, though. John Garth says that King Edward's school made as little mark on Hilary as he made on it.
Wow. Ouch.
I know. He enlisted in the British Army in 1914, before his older brother did.
Yeah.
And after the war, he bought a small orchard and a little farm in Evesham, not far from Birmingham. He got married and had 3 sons.
Wow. But according to both Carpenter's biography and Scull and Hammond's Reader's Guide, Hilary and Ronald stayed in close contact, and J.R.R. made regular visits to his brother for the rest of their lives. And late in life, when they were both widowers, they spent a lot of time together at Hilary's farm. The last chapter of Carpenter's biography includes this delightful passage from 1972. Ronald and Hilary now resembled each other far more than they had ever done in their youth. Outside the window, the plum trees whose crop Hilary had picked patiently for more than 4 decades had grown old and bore little fruit. They should be cut down and fresh saplings planted in their place, but Hilary was past tackling such work, and the trees had been left standing. The 2 old brothers watched cricket and tennis on the television and drank whiskey.
Now, if I did have a brother, that's how I'd want to spend my old age with him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So today, we'll be matching our January 3rd toast to the professor by giving a toast to Hilary.
Indeed. Happy birthday, Hilary Tolkien. Now, before we move on to our chapter discussion tonight, we want to thank Jordan Ellis Rennells for sponsoring this week's episode.
Jordan is a musician, composer, and music teacher, and Tolkien reader. Just as we've spent a lot of time exploring and analyzing the themes of Tolkien's works, Jordan has invested time in understanding the way Howard Shore composed the scores for the Lord of the Rings films.
That's right. And he's looking to take on new music students from anywhere in the world for piano, drums, guitar, or any other fretted instrument for convenient Skype-based lessons. He's also looking for people who are interested in studying music composition.
Jordan has spent years devising his own methods and explanations in music theory and relates these technical concepts back to real life and human emotions.
So if you play an instrument, or if you're interested in studying music composition with an experienced composer and music teacher, or even if you just need some sound design and scoring done for a project of your own, be sure to visit www.learntolisten.net.
And be sure to let him know you heard about him here on the Prancing Pony podcast when you reach out. That's www.learntolisten.net for Skype-based music lessons or to study music composition with Jordan Ellis Rennells. And we'll be sure to put a link to his site in our show notes and social media posts.
And thank you, Jordan. Now, let's hop along, my little friends, up the Withy Windle.
Let's do.
And we're going to pick up exactly where we left off at the end of last episode. I'm going to go ahead and read this. The hobbits began to feel very hot. There were armies of flies of all kinds buzzing round their ears, and the afternoon sun was burning on their backs. At last they came suddenly into a thin shade. Great gray branches reached across the path. Each step forward became more reluctant than the last. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up their legs, and falling softly out of the air upon their heads and eyes. Frodo felt his chin go down and his head nod, as many people do when they listen to our show.
Hey now, come on.
I'm teasing. Just don't do it while you're driving. Just in front of him, Pippin fell forward onto his knees. Frodo halted. "It's no good," he heard Merry saying. "Can't go another step without rest. Must have nap. It's cool under the willows, less flies." Frodo did not like the sound of this. "Come on," he cried. "We can't have a nap yet. We must get clear of the forest first." But the others were too far gone to care. Beside them, Sam stood yawning and blinking stupidly. Suddenly, Frodo himself felt sleep overwhelming him. His head swam. There now seemed hardly a sound in the air. The flies had stopped buzzing. Only a gentle noise on the edge of hearing, a soft fluttering, as of a song half whispered, seemed to stir in the boughs above. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw leaning over him a huge willow tree, old and hoary. Enormous it looked, its sprawling branches going up like reaching arms with many long-fingered hands, its knotted and twisted trunk gaping in wide fissures that creaked faintly as the boughs moved. The leaves fluttering against the bright sky dazzled him, and he toppled over, lying where he fell upon the grass.
Man.
And now I'm really tired. I just want to take a nap now.
Yeah, I know. There's so much here in this passage, and it's just the rhythm of the language and the words used just kind of lulls you into a sleep.
Yeah, folks, we'll come back for episode 113B next week when we finish the rest of this one. Good night. Anyway, no, I'm kidding, of course.
Of course you are.
Though I am very tired now all of a sudden. What a description, though. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and falling out of the air.
This giving sleepiness a tangible quality.
Yeah. It's kind of like my intro to art class after lunch as a freshman in college. I remember that.
Man, you're not kidding. I had an art class.
They should never schedule that right after lunch.
Right after lunch, too.
Yeah.
And you get in there and
they turn
the
out the
professor
lights.
Turns off the lights and puts on the slideshow.
That's just like...
And what are you supposed to do?
I'm paying 2 units of tuition for a nap period every week. That was ridiculous. Yeah. And we had a deal where our Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes were, I want to say, an hour 5, and our Tuesday, Thursday classes were an hour and a half. So this was a really long time to stay awake.
That's how we had. Yeah, I
Oh
know.
man. So I could identify a little bit. There were no willows.
That might be the only class I had where I almost fell asleep giving a presentation.
Giving a presentation. Wow, that's
actually
something.
Giving one. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't almost fall asleep in text me, did we? I want to make sure.
No.
Okay.
No, we did not.
No.
I don't think so.
No, I'm just kidding.
Did anybody see that?
If anybody
I don't
noticed
remember.
us falling
I was
asleep.
sleeping.
Well, remember I was operating on like 3 hours sleep that whole day.
You were.
And by that point, I think you could tell I was a little bit, kind of punch drunk, making silly comments and really.
By the end of the night, we were a little.
By the end of the night, we were flat out wrong.
Yeah. We were loopy.
We were. This desperate need for a nap, but it made me think. You talked about in the last episode about the archway and how that reminded you of that moment in Mirkwood as they entered that liminal language. This makes me think of the river in Mirkwood and Bomber's sleep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And except that there, of course, the magic only worked if you fell in the river, whereas here it's more powerful. It's in the very air that surrounds you.
Yeah, that's true. Just by being in the forest, you are susceptible to this, or in this location in the forest.
Right.
You're susceptible to this sleep spell as opposed to having to fall in the river.
Yeah. Pretty powerful stuff.
And much more sinister, this kind of slow, creeping, sleepy influence that you slowly succumb to, as opposed to Bomber hitting the stream and just falling asleep.
Oh, immediately gone, right.
Yeah.
And, one at a time here. I mean, Frodo starts to get tired, but then Pippin literally falls onto his knees. He's so tired. He can't even take another step.
Yeah.
And Frodo's still awake enough to say, no, we can't do this. Let's get out of here. Sam's gone. And then next is Frodo, and he's gone.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And he looks up into the willow, and you've got these really vivid anthropomorphic features. You know?
Yeah.
Old and hoary. Hoary is a word that means old and gray, but it's
right.
It's often used of an old man's hair or beard, right? Kind of a gray beard. But then we've got these reaching arms, these many long-fingered hands. I mean, this is
many long-fingered hands. Really, just creepy. He's looking up. He's seeing that, framed against the bright sky, the afternoon sky. I can really see that shot, that Peter Jackson never shot.
I know it's a
I
shame.
know. Well, Fellowship
again,
would have had to be
Peter
2
Jackson,
movies.
I know it's true. It would have been much longer, but Peter Jackson, came to the story as a horror film director, and
I know he would have done a
so
spectacular
many
job with this.
Great scary moments that he would have done such a great job with. I'm kind of sad that we didn't get him.
I know the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But
he couldn't do it all, I guess.
No. Eventually, you're going to lose you're gonna have to make a decision and lose some of the material. Do we read? We don't read the next little bit here about the spell.
About Merry and Pippin.
Yeah, this is really cool. Merry and Pippin. So they shut their eyes, and then listen to this. They gave themselves up to the spell and fell fast asleep at the foot of the willow. That's a really explicit reference to the magic here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't figured it out by this point, Tolkien's basically knocking you about the head. It's a spell.
Yeah.
It's a magic spell. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and of course he's got the mention of them hearing words, almost hearing words.
Yeah,
cool
you're
words,
right. Cool words.
Saying something about water and sleep. And I'm reminded of the etymological connection between the word spell, as in a magic spell, and speak.
Exactly.
I think Tolkien's drawing a very explicit connection there.
No relation to the toy speak and spell that you probably got as a kid.
Man, you're on tonight.
I don't know. Either I'm on or I'm really tired. One or the other.
It's great. Now, I would point out that they can almost hear words.
Yeah.
And we'll probably come back to that a little bit later in the episode. But
it comes back to what we heard earlier that Mary talked about. I thought I could hear them talking in this unintelligible language.
Yeah, could be.
Even if you don't speak a language, sometimes you can pick out individual words.
That's an interesting thought.
Maybe. I don't know. Or maybe there's a little...
I kind of wonder if there might be something else going on here, which we'll talk about.
And we'll talk about it later. I don't want to spoil that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I also like the fact that Frodo was making the point that, we shouldn't take the nap, but nobody listened to Frodo.
Nope.
He's like the Legolas.
He's become Melian.
And then, exactly. Melian is who I was thinking of eventually, but I was thinking just in this story, nobody listens to the elf.
Yeah, it's true.
So you've got the next passage. It's a short one, but it's a really important one.
Okay. Frodo lay for a while, fighting with the sleep that was overpowering him. Then, with an effort, he struggled to his feet again. He felt a compelling desire for cool water. "Wait for me, Sam," he stammered. "Must bathe feet a minute." Half in a dream, he wandered forward to the riverward side of the tree, where great winding roots grew out into the stream, like gnarled dragonets straining down to drink. He straddled one of these and paddled his hot feet in the cool brown water. And there he, too, suddenly fell asleep, with his back against the tree.
And now Old Man Willow's got him right where he wants him.
Got him right where he wants him.
By the way, dragonets, I didn't put a sidebar on that or anything, but the dictionary will tell you that it is a marine fish that often lies partly buried in the seabed. That's not what he's talking about here. He's using the Middle English version, the original version of the word, which simply is a small dragon. That's from the old French diminutive of dragon. So
there you go.
These are looking like little baby dragons that are straining down to drink.
Oh, cool. I like that. Yeah. I'm glad you pulled that out.
What a visual that is.
Yeah. That is these serpentine roots.
Yeah, that's a good way of
out
putting
into the stream. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, Old Man Willow here, and he hasn't been named yet, but he's very clearly powerful.
Yes.
Intensely so.
He is very powerful. He obviously has agency here. He's a threat. He's a real threat to the hobbits here.
Yeah.
And he is hostile. We talked about this last time, the trees being hostile.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely hostility here.
He's really, as much as we freaked out about the Nazgul, nothing's happened with them yet. They're pursuing, but we don't know if you're the hobbits, you don't know what they're trying to do. This is really the first openly antagonistic character that they run into, the first one that's trying to hurt them.
That's a very good point.
For now. I mean,
yeah.
It's not like the Nazgul won't try.
We'll certainly see more later on. Yeah.
But knife in the dark, folks. Knife in the dark.
So far, right. So far, the ring wraiths have just, been scary and sniffed creepily and, made scary noises.
And asked for them. If you see Frodo, could you tell him I'm calling him?
Well, I don't know. I get a little scared when people start asking for me in my neighborhood.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the first real, actual imminent threat.
Yeah, imminent threat. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, certainly the Nazgul are a more existential threat, but they're a little bit disconnected still.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after that, and we're going to see that Sam's suspicions are wisely placed. Sam sat down and scratched his head and yawned like a cavern. He was worried. The afternoon was getting late, and he thought this sudden sleepiness uncanny. "There's more behind this than sun and warm air," he muttered to himself. "I don't like this great big tree. I don't trust it. Hark at it singing about sleep now. This won't do at all." He pulled himself to his feet and staggered off to see what had become of the ponies. He found that 2 had wandered on a good way along the path, and he had just caught them and brought them back towards the others when he heard 2 noises, one loud and the other soft but very clear. One was the splash of something heavy falling into the water. The other was a noise like the snick of a lock when a door quietly closes fast. He rushed back to the bank. Frodo was in the water close to the edge, and a great tree root seemed to be over him and holding him down, but he was not struggling. Sam gripped him by the jacket and dragged him from under the root, and then with difficulty hauled him onto the bank. Almost at once he woke and coughed and spluttered. "Do you know, Sam," he said at length, "the beastly tree threw me in. I felt it. The big root just twisted round and tipped me in." That's got to be a freaky thing to realize.
Yeah.
You know, we've sometimes criticized Sam, or at least some of our listeners have, for being so skeptical and suspicious of just about everybody, and he is. We know that.
Yeah.
But boy, it pays off here.
Have we criticized him?
We,
I mean,
we
maybe,
haven't.
Maybe
we
with
haven't.
maybe with Maggot, you know.
I think we
but,
did with Maggot, but our listeners, I've seen a couple of comments about Sam being this sort of, always cynical, and I'm sure some of that's looking forward to some of those moments with Smeagol.
With Strider and Smeagol.
Well, yeah, Strider too, right? Where he's,
yeah,
from the movie, what was it? "I'll have you, Longshanks."
yeah.
No, you won't. No, you won't.
No, you're totally not going to have
You're
it.
outclassed, man.
Yeah.
But yeah.
This is just good Hobbit sense as far as I'm concerned.
It is good Hobbit sense. Hark at it singing about sleep now.
Yeah.
He knows what's going on. He realizes he kind of, in a way, he sees through the spell.
Yeah, he knows this is not a natural sleepiness. This isn't just sun and warm air. This is a spell.
But it's interesting that his first thought is to go get the ponies. I don't know. I guess
he does love a good pony. Sam
he does love himself a good pony, and they do need the gear, I guess.
Yeah.
And of course, he's probably not thinking yet that his friends are in any danger. They're just asleep, and he knows that there's something wrong with that sleep, and it shouldn't be happening.
That is interesting, though. Yeah, because it's not like he doesn't realize.
It's not like he goes and tries to wake his friends up. "Hey, guys, come on.
Right.
Come on, you got to wake up." He goes, "Oh."
Unless there's something on the ponies that he went to go get, but we don't see what that is, if anything.
That's true, yeah.
I'm totally speculating there. I have no idea.
But then, of course, he comes back. He sees Frodo, and he rescues him. Interesting stuff. Frodo realizes now that he was thrown intentionally into the water by the willow. Now, Tolkien had something interesting to say about this in letter 175. Now, he was responding to the airing of The Lord of the Rings on the BBC in 1955-56. This is not the BBC adaptation that you might be familiar with, more than likely.
Not the dramatic adaptation that came out in
the one with
1981 with Ian Holm as Frodo. Yeah, not that one.
Not that one. That one's okay. This one, apparently. Tolkien expressed his opinion that Tom Bombadil was dreadful, but worse still was the announcer's preliminary remarks that Goldberry was his daughter, and he puts an exclamation mark in parentheses, and that Willowman was an ally of Mordor, and he puts 2 exclamation marks in parentheses. Cannot people imagine things hostile to men and hobbits who prey on them without being in league with the devil? It's just a reminder. Yeah. Isn't that great? I love that. He's like, can't people realize? It's just a reminder that not all hostility, not all evil is allied with each other, just as not all good is allied.
Some things are just evil. They don't have to be in league with Sauron. They don't have to have Sauron's agenda. They're just bad. They're trees that have gone bad, and that's what we see.
Absolutely.
And we actually learn later, in the next chapter, we learn that the trees of the Old Forest do have their own agenda. It has nothing to do with Sauron.
That's right.
The thing about Goldberry being his daughter, though, that's weird.
That's a weird mistake to make.
That is a very weird mistake. Like somebody just did not.
Somebody didn't read this very closely at all.
Yeah. Now, I would add something else that I got from Hammond and Scull.
Sure.
And a reminder more than anything, something I knew, but I'm glad they put it succinctly as they usually do, that Old Man Willow existed long before Lord of the Rings.
True.
He was, in fact, one of the enemies that Tom Bombadil encountered and defeated in the poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which was originally published 3 years before The Hobbit in 1934.
Yeah.
Now, in Return of the Shadow, History of Middle-earth, Volume 6, Christopher Tolkien tells us that on a separate page, in fact, on the back of my father's earliest surviving map of the Shire, are notes that include Get Lost in Old Forest, Adventure with Willow Man and Barrow-wights, T. Bombadil.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was that far back. That's awesome.
Yep. He knew that he wanted to bring Tom Bombadil, this, character he'd written of in this poem. He wanted to bring him into the story.
Along with Willowman and the Barrow-wights, yeah.
Yep.
My goodness.
And then he ended up, obviously that poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, made it into the collection Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is part of Tales from the Perilous Realm.
Well, and it was also a volume on its own. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil was published.
Yes, it was. You're right.
Volume.
Yep.
I don't recall the year off the top of my head, but we'll look that up.
Yep.
I did like, we're not going to read it, but I guess I am going to read it. I loved Sam's little kind of somewhat almost snarky comment when he says, the tree threw me in. And Sam's basically, well, you maybe shouldn't sit on a tree root by the river if you're feeling sleepy. It's generally good advice, actually, I have to admit.
Yep, good advice. Don't sleep on tree roots near the water's edge.
Yeah. Well, there's Sam, always giving you good advice. Oh, by the way, I looked it up real quick. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, that volume, was first published in 1962. So,
okay. Yeah. And it's shown up in a number of different other collections, too, like the
Tales, the
Tolkien Reader, Tales from the Perilous Realm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting collection of poems. Definitely worth the read.
Yeah, and there's actually 2 poems about Tom Bombadil in there.
Oh, yeah.
The second one, Bombadil Goes Boating, was actually written after The Lord of the Rings, and it even mentions Maggot.
I didn't realize it was written afterwards, but that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, especially since it includes Maggot.
Yep.
Interesting stuff. Well, Frodo, of course, expresses concern about Merry and Pippin, so what happens? I'm going to have you pick up there.
They went round to the other side of the tree, and then Sam understood the click that he had heard. Pippin had vanished. The crack by which he had laid himself had closed together, so that not a chink could be seen. Merry was trapped. Another crack had closed about his waist. His legs lay outside, but the rest of him was inside a dark opening, the edges of which gripped like a pair of pincers. Frodo and Sam beat first upon the tree trunk where Pippin had lain. They then struggled frantically to pull open the jaws of the crack that held poor Merry. It was quite useless. "What a foul thing to happen!" cried Frodo wildly. "Why did we ever come into this dreadful forest? I wish we were all back at Crickhollow." He kicked the tree with all his strength, heedless of his own feet. A hardly perceptible shiver ran through the stem and up into the branches. The leaves rustled and whispered, but with a sound now of faint and far-off laughter. "I suppose we haven't got an axe among our luggage, Mr. Frodo?" asked Sam. "I brought a little hatchet for chopping firewood," said Frodo. "That wouldn't be much use." "Wait a minute," cried Sam, struck by an idea suggested by firewood. "We might do something with fire."
That's a great passage. There's a lot there. Obviously, not just a lot of narrative, but a lot of description, a lot of careful detail that we can pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Again, so much peril without anything really moving.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much action. I mean, okay, yes, the tree trunk has snapped closed,
right?
I guess in a couple of places, but you don't see anything moving. There's not a lot of action here, not a lot of activity here. But
you're right. You're not seeing Pippin's body being squished, and
right.
I mean, sorry, Mary's
body being squished. You don't see Pippin, get sucked into the tree.
No,
it's just there.
It is. You're right, and it doesn't respond. Frodo and Sam are just beating on it, and they're trying to pull open the crack, and nothing is moving. But I did think this was an interesting little bit. The shiver that ran through the stem and up into the branches, and then the leaves, the sound of faint, far-off laughter.
Ooh, that is creepy.
Just evil. This is just, mocking.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do anything to me, you pathetic little hobbit. But Sam has a good idea, doesn't he? He's like, well, wait a minute.
Fire.
You mentioned firewood. I bet we could do something with fire.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and read the next little bit about the starting of the fire.
Before you do, can I just take a moment to celebrate Sam's, I'll have it down if I have to gnaw it?
Oh, I love that.
It's just a great...
Typical Sam. I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah. Just plain determination and a bit of impracticality, of course.
Well,
but
yeah, that might take a few months.
Maybe a little hyperbole, but just determined,
maybe.
He's
maybe
willing to do
this is
whatever it
along
takes.
with the wild wereworms of the desert,
Maybe so.
If I have to gnaw it.
But he would if he could, and that's the
Yeah.
thing about Sam. He would.
He would. He absolutely would. So when he does come back, by the way, he comes back with tinder boxes. Don't they have matches in The Hobbit?
Hobbits had matches in The Hobbit. Yeah, that's one thing I thought of too. That was one of the things that actually separated Bilbo from the dwarves, wasn't it?
Because he was kind of amazed that they were using tinder boxes.
Yeah, and he was out of matches, I think, in chapter 5 under the mountains. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, clearly either would work, but you'd think it'd be easier to pack a box of matches than to take tinder boxes. But
I wonder if this is one of Tolkien's attempts to make the story seem more, seem more remote and mythical.
Yeah, maybe.
As opposed to The Hobbit. I don't know.
Could be. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up then right where Sam starts this fire. Quickly, they gathered dry grass and leaves and bits of bark and made a pile of broken twigs and chopped sticks. These they heaped against the trunk on the far side of the tree from the prisoners. As soon as Sam had struck a spark into the tinder, it kindled the dry grass, and a flurry of flame and smoke went up. The twigs crackled. Little fingers of fire licked against the dry, scored rind of the ancient tree and scorched it. A tremor ran through the whole willow. The leaves seemed to hiss above their heads with a sound of pain and anger. A loud scream came from Merry, and from far inside the tree they heard Pippin give a muffled yell. "Put it out! Put it out!" cried Merry. "He'll squeeze me in two if you don't. He says so." "Who? What?" shouted Frodo, rushing round to the other side of the tree. "Put it out! Put it out!" begged Merry. The branches of the willow began to sway violently. There was a sound as of a wind rising and spreading outwards to the branches of all the other trees round about, as though they had dropped a stone into the quiet slumber of the river valley and set up ripples of anger that ran out over the whole forest. Yeah. You know what? I stopped it there particularly because I think it's easy to kind of skim over that very significant last moment.
The ripples of anger
that
ran out over the whole forest.
Yeah. Because you're focused at this point on the danger that Merry's in and how they're going to respond. And immediately Tolkien goes back to Sam and their actions with Frodo. But that's a really important moment, isn't it? It speaks to the sentience of the trees, speaks to the hostility.
And their connection. You know, there's almost a, I don't know if it's quite a hive mind here.
But I think you're right. That's the first thing that comes to mind, huh?
Yeah. They're definitely communicating with each other. They feel the same anger.
Yeah. Oh, boy. And even if they could get away from Old Man Willow, something tells me the other trees would stop them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because of setting fire to their boss. My goodness. Fascinating stuff. The sound of pain and anger. Earlier we heard the sound of laughter, and now we hear the sound of pain and anger.
Now that's turned. Yeah, there's pain and anger.
But interesting what we hear from Merry and Pippin. Well, from Pippin, all we hear is a muffled yell, but Merry is basically telling them what the tree is saying to him.
Yeah.
He'll squeeze me in two. He says so.
Yeah, that is fascinating to me. I mean, Frodo doesn't hear this.
No, and he's right there.
Sam doesn't hear this. Yeah. And I wonder, is the tree actually speaking?
Right, with audible words,
with
measurable
audible words.
Yeah.
Or is it communicating with them some other way? Telepathically.
Exactly.
Using a kind of Osan way. I know we've got a question about this in Barlaman's Bag later.
Yeah. So spoiler, we're going to talk about that. But I think you're right.
I kind of think that might be what's going on here. I mean, there's no indication that anybody else is hearing any words. And the only words that we've heard the trees speak in before has been this unintelligible language.
Right. More like words that express emotion rather than words that identify or, very specific words.
Yeah, it's more than anything very specific that says, I am going to squeeze you in two if they don't put the fire out. Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's very detailed. That is fascinating. And to think about how that tree is communicating with Merry, It begins to put Old Man Willow into perspective in the sense that his power becomes more and more clear, and it is much more than I think we would ordinarily have expected.
Yeah, he is very powerful.
Which speaks even more interestingly of the individual we're about to run into.
Yes, that's right. And I guess I will go ahead and read this next passage, won't I?
Yeah.
Sam kicked at the little fire and stamped out the sparks. But Frodo, without any clear idea of why he did so, or what he hoped for, ran along the path, crying, "Help! Help! Help!" It seemed to him that he could hardly hear the sound of his own shrill voice. It was blown away from him by the willow wind and drowned in a clamor of leaves as soon as the words left his mouth. He felt desperate, lost and witless. Suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought, but it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back in the forest. He turned round and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense. "Hey, doll, merry doll, ring-a-dong-dillo, ring-a-dong, hop along, fall-lal the willow, tom-bom, jolly tom, tom-bombadillo." Half hopeful and half afraid of some new danger, Frodo and Sam now both stood still.
Can't blame them. I mean, there's some weirdness going on at this point.
You don't say.
You just kind of stand there slack-jawed.
Okay, so I'm trapped between a tree that's eating my friends.
A killer tree and a really weird dude.
And foul-lal the willow, ring-a-dong-dillo on the other end.
I know. Seriously. He has no sense of perspective. No sense.
Nope.
None. And actually, that's really true in some ways, but we'll get to that more in the next chapter.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning of that passage that I read of Frodo running along the path calling for help. And I really want to point out this without any clear idea of why he did so or what he hoped for.
Exactly.
It's almost like the idea was put in his mind.
Yes, it was. I think you're right.
As if it's a moment of inspiration. You know, we talked about these a few times. We had a few of them in the first age, didn't we? I don't think we had any with The Hobbit, and I'm not sure we've had any in this book yet. But, you know, I'm thinking back to those moments in the first age when, like, Beren or Tuor actually speaks with words that have been placed in their mouths.
Yeah. Where words came out of their mouths and they're like, whoa, what was that?
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that Frodo couldn't come up with help on his own, but something put the idea in his head to go
to
cry
run
for help.
and cry.
You know? Yeah.
I mean, really, does he think that there's anybody here to help him?
Right. Why would he ever think that anybody's there? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Why would he? But there he is.
But there he is indeed.
One might say, you catastrophically.
One might say indeed.
So here he is. Should we say his name?
Shall we? Well, I think he pretty much has. Tom Bomb, Jolly Tom Bombadillo.
He has said his name.
Yeah.
There he is. Finally, Tom Bombadil has made his appearance on the Prancing Pony podcast.
Finally.
Folks.
113 episodes, nearly 3 years, and Tom finally shows up.
Honestly, we've talked about him
before,
but he hasn't shown.
No, we haven't seen him on stage, if you will.
Right.
So now what? Now he sings a song that we're not going to read, the full song, because full works don't want to read a full work.
Right.
So even though we won't talk about the whole song, let's talk about a few of the elements that are in there. The first one that comes to mind is River Woman's Daughter.
Yeah, Goldberry, the River Woman's daughter.
We don't know that yet. We don't know her name yet.
Oh, that's true.
Oh, we just know it like
later,
4 lines later.
Later
Goldberry, Merry Yellow Berry-O.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a really bad off-brand of soda.
I was thinking cereal, but yeah, I'm
cereal
right there
too.
With you.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, I mean, River Woman's daughter, you know, we never really get an explanation for this, but it seems like she must be the daughter of some sort of personification of the River Withywindle, you know, some sort of spirit that personifies the river. Yeah.
Just as Tom may, though we won't be going into details about that tonight, may in fact be a personification himself.
Yeah, that's true. And you can certainly see a lot of imagery here that's sort of associated, with the forest.
With the hill, the cold starlight, the water, the water lilies, the willow man.
The name, the Willow Man. And a lot of nonsense.
Of
or
course.
At least it sounds
it's
like
a Tom
nonsense.
Bombadil song, so of course it's a lot of nonsense.
Yeah. Well, they seemed like nonsense. Doesn't it say that in here? Nonsense words, or so they seemed. I wonder about that, and we might end up revisiting that.
Isn't
a little bit
that
more
something
next
that
time.
he said also when Bilbo and the dwarves got to Rivendell? Wasn't the Elvish song described as being nonsense, or so it seemed? I don't remember.
That sounds right. I don't. Yeah, that sounds right.
Or some other nonsense. Maybe it was just nonsense. There it is. So they laughed and sang in the trees, and pretty fair nonsense, I dare say you think it. Not that they would care. They'd only laugh all the more if you told them so.
That's right. Yep.
So anyway, interesting. It just reminded me of that for a brief moment.
Which hints that it's not nonsense at all. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit to say about the song itself, though, huh?
Yeah, and I don't want to go into too much detail on it right now. I just want listeners to pay attention to the particular rhythm of Tom's song. And again, we promise, folks, we will be spending a lot of time on Tom in the next few episodes.
Yeah.
But
you think?
But if we, no. People have only been waiting 113 episodes to get some answers about Tom Bombadil.
Oh, they've been waiting longer than that, but yeah.
In years before that, yeah. But if you look at the rhythm of Tom's song, it's what we call a falling meter. Metrical feet made up of a stressed syllable followed by one or more unstressed syllables, as opposed to a rising meter where the stressed syllables follow the unstressed ones. Right. So an example here, if you look at a line like, "Hey, come Merry doll, dairy doll, my darling," that there's always a stress first.
Stress,
and then
yeah.
Unstressed follows the stress. This gives Tom's singing a kind of almost like a chanting quality that I want listeners to notice here and as they continue reading. But I want to leave it there for now because I'm going to have some more to say about it in the next chapter.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you read it like that because I'd been reading it all along like, "Hey, come Merry doll, dairy doll, my darling." No, I'm just kidding. It's
that would be a very strange way to read it.
Yes, it would. That would be a rising meter. That would be forcing a rising meter onto something that isn't. No, I actually did that so that you could kind of get an idea of what it would sound like if it were a rising meter. And it would be awkward. You have to read it this way. And having it be that falling meter is certainly unusual. It's different. It's not something that we're accustomed to. But yeah, you're right. It's something we should pay attention to. And we'll talk about it more, in the next chapter.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after that, though, as the man appears himself on the scene. Frodo and Sam stood as if enchanted. The wind puffed out. The leaves hung silently again on stiff branches. There was another burst of song, and then suddenly, hopping and dancing along the path, there appeared above the reeds an old battered hat with a tall crown and a long blue feather stuck in the band. With another hop and a bound, there came into view a man, or so it seemed. At any rate, he was too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the big people, though he made noise enough for one, stumping along with great yellow boots on his thick legs, and charging through grass and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He had a blue coat and a long brown beard. His eyes were blue and bright, and his face was red as a ripe apple, but creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter. In his hands he carried on a large leaf, as on a tray, a small pile of white water lilies. "Help!" cried Frodo and Sam, running towards him with their hands stretched out. "Whoa, whoa, steady there!" cried the old man, holding up one hand, and they stopped short, as if they had been struck stiff. "Now, my little fellows, where be you a-going to, puffin' like a bellows? What's the matter here, then? Do you know who I am? I'm Tom Bombadil. Tell me what's your trouble. Tom's in a hurry now, don't you crush my lilies."
He just comes right up and he just sort of starts taking charge of the situation, doesn't he?
He does. And I love this. Yeah. It's kind of a blink and you miss it moment. They stopped short as if they'd been struck stiff when he told them, "Steady there." Almost like a magical sort of, you're frozen now.
Yeah.
You can't move, as if they'd been struck stiff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tom Bombadil's got some power, that's for sure.
He's got some real power, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so they ask him for some help.
Yeah.
He wants to know what's going on. And even the way he asks, and I thought you did a great job with this, we'll see this throughout the Tom Bombadil chapters, even when his words are printed as prose, not as verse. there's this rhythm to them.
Oh, yeah.
There's a very clear poetic meter that's very close, actually identical in most places to the meter of his singing.
Yeah, it's that falling meter, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tom Shippey observes in Road to Middle-earth, saying, "While we appreciate it as rhythmical, unlike prose, we also do not mark it as premeditated or artificial, unlike verse."
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I mean,
So it's a way of really making it feel natural, just like
yes.
this is just the way this guy speaks. He's not affecting poetry.
Exactly.
It's just who he is.
That's the word I would have thought as well. This isn't an affectation. He's not putting on airs and walking around singing because he likes to hear his own voice. This is just how he talks.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Now, in general, we're going to have a much more lengthy sidebar on Tom in one of the episodes for the next chapter. Not sure yet which one. But for now, we're just going to start our description of Tom, or our explanation of Tom, with letter number 154, in which the professor reminds us that even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one, intentionally. Now, that doesn't mean we won't explore the enigma, but we want to start there, of course.
We will certainly speculate. We will certainly
probably
kick around some
quite
ideas.
Irrationally, I imagine, as well.
Probably so, but that's where the fun begins.
Yeah. So, amazing scene. Just Tom appearing, his visual appearance, the fact that he's a little bit shorter than a human, but certainly taller than a hobbit. Too heavy, so he's very big. He's got thick legs, and even the metaphor about him going through the grass and rushes like a cow, I think implies, here's a pretty thick fella.
Yeah, I think so. I just love the descriptions. I mean,
oh, I know.
Red as a ripe apple.
I love that. That's exactly the one that caught my eye too.
Creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter.
You can just see him almost perpetually smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the crow's feet and the wrinkles all over. Yeah.
Yep.
So interesting though, when they ask for help, his first response isn't to say, "Oh, okay, great. Where do I need to go?" He's like, "Well, what's, where you be a going to? What's the matter? Don't you know who I am?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know who I am? Does he really expect them to know who he is? I mean, maybe he does. Maybe he has reason to think that the hobbits should all be aware of their very unique neighbor, but they're not.
Maybe so. I mean, Maggot knows who he is.
Well, that's true, actually. That's a very good point.
But then again, Maggot is an exceptional hobbit, isn't he?
Maggot is a very exceptional hobbit, as we'll find out. Tom has some very interesting things to say about him, very highly complimentary. Was it "see through a brick wall in time," I believe, is one of his...
I love that one.
That is one of my favorite little quotes. I probably use that one too often, but good stuff. So they explain what's going on. They tell him, our friends are caught in the willow tree, which is not something you expect to have to tell somebody. But Tom's reaction is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He jumps right into action, and I'll go ahead and read there.
Yeah.
"What?" shouted Tom Bombadil, leaping up into the air. "Old Man Willow? Not worse than that, eh? That can soon be mended. I know the tune for him, old grey willow man. I'll freeze his marrow cold if he don't behave himself. I'll sing his roots off. I'll sing a wind up and blow leaf and branch away, Old Man Willow." Setting down his lilies carefully on the grass, he ran to the tree. There he saw Merry's feet still sticking out. The rest had already been drawn further inside. Tom put his mouth to the crack and began singing into it in a low voice. They could not catch the words, but evidently Merry was aroused. His legs began to kick. Tom sprang away, and breaking off a hanging branch, smote the side of the willow with it. "You let them out again, Old Man Willow," he said. "What be you a-thinking of? You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Bombadil is talking." He then seized Merry's feet and drew him out of the suddenly widening crack.
Well, I suppose Mary's probably pretty relieved at that.
Oh, quite, yeah. Got to be a little weird for a while there, because suddenly this guy's mouth is there at the crack and you're suddenly hearing this singing.
Yeah,
but
he's singing into the tree, but it certainly worked. It worked.
This adventure is getting stranger all the time.
Yes, it is. Okay, so we were in a forest, and then we were being eaten by a tree, and then this dude with yellow boots and a blue jacket who couldn't stop smiling was singing into the tree.
Singing into the tree?
It was weird, man. It was really weird.
Worst summer vacation ever.
Seriously. It's only going to get worse. Trust me.
It really is only going to get worse.
I did like Tom's reaction at the beginning. I thought that was telling. Old Man Willow, not worse than that, eh?
Yeah.
I know the song. I know the tune for him.
I love that.
That is really interesting.
I know the tune for him. It's like it's implying that there's like a code. He knows like the secret code for how to shut down Old Man Willow.
Yeah. Control Alt Delete.
That'll do it.
That'll do it every time. I also like the way he speaks to Old Man Willow when he tells him what to do. You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Bombadil is talking.
And when Bombadil talks.
Exactly. Willows listen.
Willows listen, of course.
And it made me think of how, I know we get criticized for our dad jokes sometimes. This is not a dad joke. This is a dad story, a dad explanation or illustration. It made me think of the times when I'm telling my son what to do, and I say, now do it. I told you to do it. Go do it. Bombadil is speaking as though he possesses authority, as though he has the right, the inherent right.
To command the willow.
Exactly. Not just the magical ability because he knows the song, but because he has the right to do this. As though the willow has an obligation to obey him, and which, of course, he does.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough. I mean, again, that's because of the spell, most likely. But I just thought that was interesting, that assumption of authority there.
It is really cool. And, it reminds me of something that happens much later in Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf confronts the Balrog under Moria.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, I had to speak a word of command.
Yes.
And we never get an explanation of exactly what that is, but it's some sort of magical utterance. But some sort of spell. But I can't help but think that some kind of authority is implied in that too. But I can't help thinking about that with this because Bombadil really does speak with authority. Bombadil is talking.
Yeah.
Whoa. All right.
Okay. Well then,
listen.
Because I said so is the answer.
Exactly.
And that's what it made me think of. Yeah.
Yep.
So I love that Merry, is pulled out, but Pippin is ejected out as if he'd been kicked. You don't read that, but it's good stuff. I love it. So of course they thank him, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up there. Tom Bombadil burst out laughing. Well, my little fellows, said he, stooping so that he peered into their faces, you shall come home with me. The table is all laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter. Goldberry is waiting. Time enough for questions around the supper table. You follow after me as quick as you are able. With that, he picked up his lilies, and then with a beckoning wave of his hand went hopping and dancing along the path eastward, still singing loudly and nonsensically. Too surprised and too relieved to talk, the hobbits followed after him as fast as they could. But that was not fast enough. Tom soon disappeared in front of them, and the noise of his singing got fainter and further away. Suddenly, his voice came floating back to them in a loud halloo. Sorry, that word just cracks me up every time I read it.
It's a great word.
It is a great word.
You can't say it without smiling.
Halloo.
Or laughing.
Yeah. Of course, just a little word nerdery. It's used to incite dogs to the chase during a hunt. It's this mid-16th century, comes probably from the rare verb hallow, to pursue or urge on with shouts from Old French hallower. So at least that's what I'm learning today.
Very nice.
So here's what he says in that voice that comes back in a loud halloo. Hop along, my little friends, up the withy windle. Tom's going on ahead, candles for to kindle. Down west sinks the sun, soon you will be groping. When the night shadows fall, then the door will open. Out of the window panes light will twinkle yellow. Fear no alder black, heed no hoary willow. Fear neither root nor bough, Tom goes on before you. Hey now, merry doll, we'll be waiting for you. There you go. The
more I read this book, the more I love Tom.
I know. Me too. I will admit, I didn't. Yeah. You're about to say the same thing I did, huh? There were some times I kind of skimmed these.
Exactly. Yeah. There were some times when I thought, oh man, Tom Bombadil. Can we just
again.
Get through this, on some of my earlier readings. But as I get older, I do just, and maybe it's just, kind of understanding more about Tolkien's history with Tom Bombadil and some of the things he said about him. And And again, we will get into this in a future episode. But
Much more.
I just love it. I just take a lot of joy in just hearing his song now.
Yeah. Well, and I think it should bring you joy. That's clearly the underlying emotion that Tolkien puts into Tom's songs. It's
definitely
a carefree joy.
All those laughter lines in his face,
unburdened, unworried, and of course he can be unworried. He has much more power than you would imagine. So yeah. So he
but also unburdened, and we'll be getting into
unburdened
all of that.
is really and of course that also is a limitation for him, as we'll find out too.
Yeah, that's right.
So he invites them to his house, and
inviting them home, and
have a little supper with us. But he goes too fast. He doesn't stick with his guest, which is kind of a little on the rude side. But at least he sends a song back on the halloo.
Sends a song back saying, hey, don't worry, I'm taking care of the road ahead of you. You're going to be safe.
Yeah. And pretty soon you'll see the light coming out of the windows, and you're going to love it. It's going to be a warm welcome.
That's right.
So even though we're not going to read the next paragraph, there's some really beautiful language there. The slanting light of evening that they were thinking about, the windows of Bucklebury. Contrast that with what they actually see, the shadows, the trunks and branches of the trees that are dark and threatening, and the mists.
Yeah.
But fortunately, they continue on thinking, okay, Tom's got this. And then you've got the next little passage, huh?
Yes, I do. Here we go. It became difficult to follow the path, and they were very tired. Their legs seemed leaden. Strange, furtive noises ran among the bushes and reeds on either side of them, and if they looked up to the pale sky, they caught sight of queer, gnarled, and knobbly faces that gloomed dark against the twilight, and leered down at them from the high bank and the edges of the wood. They began to feel that all this country was unreal, and that they were stumbling through an ominous dream that led to no awakening. Just as they felt their feet slowing down to a standstill, they noticed that the ground was gently rising. The water began to murmur. In the darkness, they caught the white glimmer of foam where the river flowed over a short fall. Then suddenly the trees came to an end, and the mists were left behind. They stepped out from the forest and found a wide sweep of grass welling up before them. The river, now small and swift, was leaping merrily down to meet them, glinting here and there in the light of the stars, which were already shining in the sky.
I think that little bit's important. The stars. The stars are always a symbol,
absolutely.
Aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, stars are usually a symbol of fairy, of enchantment, of the power of myth, the world beyond. Yeah.
And even of Varda herself.
Those things.
Sometimes. But
and of Varda herself. Yep. And really the crossover into Tom's land, Tom's realm,
right.
could not be more clear. I mean, they leave behind these mists and these peril, and they look up and they see those stars.
It's another one of those little liminal points that you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah,
yep.
Really is. And there's not a whole lot to say specifically about that passage beyond that. I wanted you to read it because of the description. The description of what they were experiencing along the path, the gnarled, knobbly faces, that they were stumbling through an ominous dream, a real, genuine peril. That were they not following Tom here, this would be the end of their journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
But because they're following Tom and he's got this, he's gone ahead and prepared that path. It turns around here in that last paragraph. How the water murmurs, there's the glimmer of foam, the mists end, and there's this beautiful scene. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up right there because the rest of this is just so neat.
Yep.
The grass under their feet was smooth and short, as if it had been mown or shaven. The eaves of the forest behind were clipped and trim as a hedge. The path was now plain before them, well tended and bordered with stone. It wound up to the top of a grassy knoll, now gray under the pale, starry night. And there, still high above them on a further slope, they saw the twinkling lights of a house. Down again the path went, and then up again, up a long, smooth hillside of turf, towards the light. Suddenly, a wide yellow beam flowed out brightly from a door that was opened. There was Tom Bombadil's house before them, up, down, under hill. Behind it, a steep shoulder of the land lay gray and bare, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the Barrow Downs stalked away into the eastern night. They all hurried forward, hobbits and ponies. Already half their weariness and all their fears had fallen from them. "Hey, come, merry doll," rolled out the song to greet them. "Hey, come, merry doll, hop along, my hearties. Hobbits, ponies all, we are fond of parties. Now let the fun begin, let us sing together." Then another clear voice, as young and as ancient as spring, like the song of a glad water flowing down into the night from a bright morning in the hills, came falling like silver to meet them. "Now let the song begin, let us sing together, of sun, stars, moon and mist, rain and cloudy weather. Light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open hill, bells on the heather, reeds by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil and the river daughter." And with that song, the hobbits stood upon the threshold, and a golden light was all about them.
Wow.
I love that. Absolutely love
Such
that.
You talk about liminal language.
Boy, yeah. It's everywhere.
Everywhere in this passage, going right down to the end. Stood upon the threshold.
Yeah.
Is pretty clear.
There's your explicit reference. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But going back to the very beginning, you see the contrast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked about this crossover into Tom's realm, and you see already how there's, after all the wilderness and the confusing, peril of the forest, there's suddenly civilization, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. Mowed grass.
Mowed grass.
The clipped eaves and trim as a hedge, and a path that,
stone-bordered path.
A path that clearly doesn't move because it's bordered with stone.
Right. Yeah, right. Finally, a path that doesn't move.
Gotta move the stones again because the path
went. How hard it is to find one of those around here?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The lights,
and they can see
house.
Clearly the house in front of them, the lights on.
Beautiful.
The open door welcoming them.
And yet there's still that slight foreboding, isn't it? Again, because we hear about the Barrow Downs. We see that that brief mention.
Yeah.
They're there. But right after that is this wonderful line that I absolutely love. Already half their weariness and all their fears had fallen from them.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Not only do they feel refreshed, partially refreshed, half their weariness, but now all their fears are gone.
They feel completely safe.
Totally at peace.
No fear.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which has got to be the first time they felt that way since they've been in the old forest.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's probably the first time they felt that way since leaving, honestly.
That's true. That's true, because who knows whether the Black Rider might have made it to their home in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So Tom gets that real short greeting about basically, hey, party with us. And then you get Goldberry. Now, I love the way her voice is described, as young and as ancient as spring. Wow.
Like the song of a glad water flowing down into the night from a bright morning in the hills. I love that part.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's this contrast, or not contrast. It's almost a conundrum, a juxtaposition. Young and ancient. That's amazing. And yet that's spring for you, isn't it? Spring is this renewal. The earth is young again. And yet, of course, spring itself is ancient beyond belief.
Is an ancient thing, an ancient tradition.
Yeah.
An ancient cycle.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. I mean, I
every
year.
The
thing that strikes me was every year. This time
man.
Every year we get another spring. I like just a water flowing down into the night from a bright morning, because there's a contrast there too, and that's a spring-like contrast.
Yes, it is.
Morning and sunrise.
Yeah.
Is
flowing water as opposed to maybe frozen. Not that we see frozen water here, but that is a thing that we see in spring, is that now the waters flow again. So,
yep.
Yeah.
And it's glad. Yep.
And her song is interesting. What are we going to sing about? We're going to sing about nature. We're going to sing about the sun, the stars, the moon, and the mist. We're going to sing about light and dew and wind, flowers and reeds. And this is great stuff.
It is really great stuff. And rain and cloudy weather, wind on the open hill. There's things that we like here. There's things that we might not like as much here,
Yeah.
But there's beauty in all of it.
And we're going to get plenty of rain, as we know, towards the end of their stay here. But
yes, we are.
This is an amazing moment. I just want you to soak it in. But you're not going to be able to soak it in for too long, because, folks, that does wrap it up for this episode's discussion and for the Old Forest. So be sure to join us again next week for a very special episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
That's right. Late last year, we tackled a big issue for our patrons in our exclusive quarterly special. We dug deep and answered some hard questions about race in Middle-earth.
Yes, we did. And we felt it was an important topic, one that shouldn't be limited to just our patrons. But that wasn't really our call to make. So we asked those who contribute every month to support our show, and they agreed, encouraging us to release this exclusive content to everyone.
So we'll be doing that next week, but then after that, be sure to come back the following week as we enjoy a brief stay in the house of Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to Barliman's Bag, we want to thank those of you who've joined the fellowship of the podcast, as you've helped us reach our next goal of setting up a Discord server.
That's right. Folks, you want a chance to listen into a live episode recording? Not only do you get all the humiliation that doesn't even make our outtakes, you get a sneak peek of an episode weeks in advance. Now, if that's what you want to do, be sure to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. You'll also get access to other exclusive content when you join at the Gift of Gondor level or higher.
And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd be grateful. It increases our visibility. That means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a more vibrant Tolkien community.
And it's also helpful if you share us on social media. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, maybe even Instagram, I don't know. Wherever there are Tolkien fans gathered. And with that, it's time to see what old Barliman has in the mailbag for us tonight. Sean?
Yeah, for starters, Matt S. in Michigan wrote to us with a handful of questions about the Old Forest, and here we are. First of all, are our lovely and terrifying friends in the Old Forest Huorns? Treebeard seems to be a little inconclusive on the topic. If they are Huorns, are they tree-ish Ents or Entish trees? And if they are tree-ish Ents, then which Ents are they? Number 2. As we get closer to the heart of the Old Forest, Pippin mentions the heart of the forest. And I was wondering who or what is the heart of the Old Forest. Is it the terrifying Old Man Willow, or Joyful Tom, or someone or something else entirely? Number 3. As I am talking of Old Man Willow, who or what is he? For he is very powerful, even for the trees of the Old Forest, and can manipulate the land around him with his music. And I found Tom's answer a little short of satisfactory.
Well, you're not the only one on that one.
No kidding. Number 4. Also speaking of Tom, how does he make his paths? For he doesn't seem like a being to use an axe or saw, and he seems to be a lot like Beorn in that matter. Number 5. Finally, did our tree-ish friends attack the Shire because they supposed it was a threat to their home? Or was it purely out of malice for all mannish beings? Matt closed his email to us by saying, I know that some of the talk around your excellent tavern may be insufficient for a definite response on some of this, but even your best guess would be much appreciated.
My goodness.
Well, good news, Matt. We're going to give you our best guesses.
That's exactly what they're going to be. In the meantime, did he slip a $100 bill in there? We're answering how many questions? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. It's a joke. We're happy to do
They're
that.
short ones.
They are. So I think we owe it to Matt to answer these lightning round style so that we can get through all of them, because otherwise we'd have to have an entire episode just on the trees of the Old Forest.
That's right.
First of all, are the trees Huorns? Are they trees that have become Entish or Ents that have become tree-ish? What do you think, Sean?
Well, I think they're trees that have become Entish. In Book 3, Treebeard explains to Merry and Pippin that some trees in Fangorn are becoming Entish, and he says, and I'm not going to do the Treebeard voice, we'll be here all night, when that happens to a tree, you find that some have bad hearts, and that kind of thing tends to spread.
Oh, come on, it was a short passage.
I know, I didn't see where the quotation mark ended, but it's fine.
To a tree.
Lightning round, man. I know.
Round. Besides, he continues, and the next continuation is longer, I know.
Right, that's true. Mary asks if that's what's going on in the Old Forest, and Treebeard says, Aye, something like, but much worse. I do not doubt there is some shadow of the great darkness lying there still away north, and bad memories are handed down. But there are hollow dales in this land where the darkness has never been lifted. So Treebeard's mostly talking about Fangorn there, and how much worse parts of Fangorn are than the Old Forest.
Right.
But in the course of doing that, he does give us a little bit of explanation of what's happening here in the Old Forest. The trees in both forests are becoming Entish. And does that make them Huorns? Maybe. Merry says later to Aragorn and his friends when they're reunited that he thinks the Huorns are Ents that have become tree-ish, not trees that have become Entish. So if we're being really literal with that, then maybe they're not Huorns, but I kind of get the sense that it's a spectrum.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. You know, it's worth noting that Fangorn and the Old Forest are more closely related than people may realize. As we'll see in a few months, Elrond says to the council that Of the old forest many tales have been told. All that now remains is but an outlier of its northern march. Time was when a squirrel could go from tree to tree, from what is now the Shire to Dunlop, west of Isengard. Well, Treebird actually takes that a step further, saying that there was all one wood once upon a time, from here to the mountains of Lune, and this was just the east end. So, what that means is that the old forest and Fangorn are just about all that remains of one huge forest that once covered almost the entire western map of Middle-earth, so they are closely related.
Yep, I agree. All right, well, next up, who or what is the heart of the old forest?
Well, I think we'll try to answer this a little more lightning. I think that,
We'll do our best.
When the text says that, it just means the center, the deepest, the innermost part of the forest. Though it does seem to have more to do with Old Man Willow than with Tom Bombadil, since the shifting of the trees constantly leads the hobbits towards the heart of the forest. So what is Old Man Willow? Well, aside from what Tolkien said and what we discussed earlier, that he wasn't in league with Mordor, I mean, we know that. So what else is he?
Well, I'm not sure I have much of an answer to that one besides what we get in the text later on, and I don't want to spoil too much of that. But in the next chapter, Tom tells the hobbits a little bit about the history of the Old Forest. He says, "It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of vast forgotten woods, and in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom, and with malice. But none were more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning, and a master of winds, and his song and thought ran through the woods on both sides of the river. His gray, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth, and spread like fine root threads in the ground, and invisible twig fingers in the air, till it had under its dominion nearly all the trees of the forest from the hedge to the downs." So there again we get the idea that the creatures in the forest are actually trees,
True.
and that Old Man Willow is one of those trees who has a gray, thirsty spirit.
Yeah, I agree. In an early draft of the next chapter, in The Return of the Shadow, there's a passage that says how Tom tells them a lot about Old Man Willow, though not enough for them to understand how that gray, thirsty, earthbound spirit had become imprisoned in the greatest willow of the forest. Well, that early version makes it clear that there is a spirit of some kind trapped in the willow, rather than the spirit being the willow's own spirit. But Tolkien changed that language. Now, admittedly, whether he changed it because he rejected the underlying idea that there was a spirit trapped in the tree, we just don't know. But I would seem to think that if he went from it's trapped to the spirit of the willow, that he did indeed get rid of that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. And I know some people have speculated that Old Man Willow's spirit is a Maya or something similar. I don't personally think it is, and I don't think it has to be. Going back to the earlier quote from the professor that I'll just paraphrase, can't things just be hostile?
Yeah.
Can't some trees just have a spirit and just be evil? I mean, if elves and men can be evil, and they're children of Iluvatar, and dwarves can be evil, and they're children of Aule, adopted by Iluvatar, and if eagles, who are Manwë's creations, can be cowardly and cruel, as we get that they can be in The Hobbit, I guess I would say, why not trees? I mean, I think Old Man Willow is just an evil tree who's more powerful than most because he is very ancient. And I'll admit I might have said something different if I had fielded this question back in season 1, but that's kind of where I am on it now.
Maybe.
So, Alan, how does Tom make his paths without an axe?
Well, I think he might have a chainsaw. No, I'm kidding. Probably by singing. We know the trees can move on their own. Well, maybe he just has a contractor do it for him. I don't know.
That's the easiest way.
Yeah.
If you got the money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why put your time into this? No, we know that the trees can move on their own. We've seen that happen earlier. And Tom's songs are powerful enough to make Old Man Willow, the most powerful of the trees, do what Tom tells it to do. It seems like Tom must sing to the trees to make them move out of his way, thus creating paths. But as he leaves, especially as he leaves the area, sometimes the trees move back and encroach on the paths that he's made, trying to hide them. That's why the paths move, and it's very hard for them to navigate the forest. And finally, Sean, did the trees of the old forest attack out of general malice, or were they actually responding to a perceived threat?
I'd say it's a bit of both, depending on your point of view. In the passage that I read a moment ago from the next chapter where Tom explains, the trees of the old forest remember times when they were lords, clearly it sounds to me from reading that passage that the trees want the hobbits off their land. They want to take it back. Now, we are reading this story from the Hobbit's perspective, and we know that they don't pose an imminent threat to the Old Forest. But from the tree's perspective, I think anyone who lives on land that used to be theirs is going to be viewed as unwelcome and is going to be viewed as a threat. I suspect they were probably trying to scare the hobbits away more than actually force them out, but still, they want the hobbits gone.
I think you're probably right. Well, that wasn't exactly lightning round style, Matt, but hopefully we answered all your questions to your satisfaction. Next up, though, we have one from DeMay in Alaska. She asks, for what did Old Man Willow capture Merry and Pippin if it wasn't to kill them? Now, she's referring to the fact that Old Man Willow trapped them, but doesn't actually try to kill them until Sam and Frodo begin to set them on fire. So she goes on to say, this makes it sound like Old Man Willow was just playing a prank and wasn't planning on really harming the hobbits that he'd captured. Looks like only the threat of fire made him decide to harm them. And then she asks the second question, Old Man Willow speaks their language. Why? How? When did he study their language?
You know, I think the last question from Matt and the first one from DeMay have similar answers in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an intimidation tactic.
Yeah.
I think Old Man Willow is trying to terrorize them.
Yep.
If the Old Forest has a get the hobbits out agenda, then killing Merry and Pippin would do him little good. I think that agenda is actually going to be much better served by scaring them so that they go back to the Shire with stories about just how scary the Old Forest is. Like, oh man, this tree tried to eat me. And, and then enough hobbits get scared and decide to move away. It's a little bit like, can't believe I'm making this comparison, but it's a little bit like the ghosts in Poltergeist. If they really wanted to hurt that family, they could, but they really just try to scare them away.
Wow.
But I don't know. Alan, you have any speculation on that?
Yeah, not related to Poltergeist, though. Just want to be clear. But yeah, I do have thoughts. I mean, granted, they're pretty much the same ones you had, so, what's the point? But as the guy on Pirates of the Caribbean says, dead men tell no tales. See, Old Man Willow couldn't hope to eat all of the hobbits. I mean, first of all, they're not all going to come into the Old Forest, and second, there just aren't enough Tums in the world for that dinner. So he's terrifying Merry and Pippin, hoping that they will convince the other hobbits to move away.
Yeah, I agree. Now, as for DeMay's second question, how does Old Man Willow speak their language? I don't know. I'm not sure he does.
Yeah,
I think we,
right.
We talked about this a little bit earlier. Frodo and Sam don't seem to actually hear him speak. We never hear him say any actual words.
Right.
The text says they can almost hear words saying something about water and sleep. And we saw later that Merry told Frodo and Sam, he says he'll squeeze me in two. But in the absence of seeing any actual dialogue, I'm inclined to think that this is a kind of telepathy or Osanwe, rather than speech with actual words. I mean, after all, Old Man Willow, whatever kind of spirit we decide to say he is a very ancient one, and maybe he's developed that ability.
Yeah, though if that's the case, I probably would end up leaning more towards Amaya, but I'm with you that he doesn't have to be. But Osanwe, if he is using telepathy, that's a pretty powerful ability. But it's all speculation.
But again, the Eldar have that ability, and
that's true. That's true. You're
we
right.
Just don't know.
Yeah, they're certainly not
the old ones.
So yeah,
the old and wise ones do. Yeah,
yeah.
We just don't know. Yeah,
no, you're right. It's all speculation, but it's interesting speculation. I mean, no doubt. Well, folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. We do hope, though, that you'll join us next week for our conversation about race in Middle-earth.
Folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. So see the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And as always, a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. That's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your tables laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter to Bartleman at theprancingponypodcast.com. Yeah, honeycomb. Man, I haven't had that in a while. We'll try to get him into our next show. Well, folks, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.